So that was a kind of immortality that
Yes.
with the cello, and you are writing about amortality. What does you've coined the expression amortality?
Yes.
What does it mean?
I coined it. It's one of those words that just came to me. I was asked by an editor from New York, what are you noticing that's going on in the world? What are the big trends? And I said the first thing that came into my mind was we don't grow old the way we used to. And then I thought, well, actually, it's not just about the end of life, it's all the way through life. You can't tell what age people are from outward symbols, from the way people dress. You know, the notion of acting your age has become extremely tenuous, if ever it didn't mean anything. And I thought, well, why is this? It's not just about the way we live, it's also about the way we die or what we think about death. And so amortality is also referring in a way to our expectations of living forever, or at least a lot longer, and our habit of ignoring uncomfortable facts about, you know, what might happen at the end of life.
So why do you think we got into this? Because, I mean, it's certainly true in my case. I mean, I can remember my mother at my age, which is 60. She seemed very old. She dressed in a particular way. She didn't really do very much anymore. And it seems very different now. Well, how did this happen?
There have been real changes, and there have been real changes just in terms of life expectancy, huge changes. We live 30 years longer than we used to in the developed world. That change has come in the 20th century. But it is also worth remembering, age is something that can be measured biologically, but it's also a cultural construct. And what's happened, and this is a lot of what my book is looking at, is that these different ideas have sort of decoupled and disconnected. So, for example, the way in which we expect ourselves to behave or age or be, which is a culturally generated phenomenon, in some ways we are outstripping the developments in technology. You know, we expect more than is actually possible, but in other ways we lag it. So you'll still have, whenever a 51-year-old woman gets on stage in a short dress, there is bound to be somebody out there thinking that's inappropriate.
But we have that expression, you're only as old as you feel.
Yes.
And you quote in your book Mick Jagger saying, I'd rather be dead than playing rock and roll at 45.
Yes, which he said when he
in
was
about
young.
1970.
Yeah.
And now we have Mick Jagger playing rock and roll at 65. So what does that say about the ageing process, that we don't have any sense of a behaviour at an age?
Well, that's why I'm talking about that there are still the voices that say that one should behave age appropriately, but the question there is, what is age appropriate? And the reason the subtitle of my book is The Pleasures and Perils of Living Agelessly is that although I think it's a very good idea to ignore the sort of pursed-lipped reductive views of age, the idea that because you have reached a certain age you will, you know, put away childish things and behave like an adult is not usually very helpful. On the other hand, never growing up at all is not very helpful either. So it's one of those things, as I say. What interested me was the whole series of disconnects and the crazy behaviour and the less crazy behaviour. And people like Mick Jagger, it's very easy to see. But I mean, I was actually very interested in what Natalie was saying, because Natalie was saying that she actually liked to swim against the tide, and that she was going for a different kind of agelessness. And there are people who, I mean, if you think about, and by the way, Natalie, I'm not saying you are a young fogey, but I was about to say, if you think about the class of people one refers to as young fogies, they are people who get stuck in one moment of their lives, and they stay that way all the way through their lives. So it's impossible to tell, again, what age they are. So this is all, though, about the externals. There are, as I say, there are actually really serious implications to this as well. And there are great, huge, convulsive changes going on that we're only just really beginning to pay attention to.
Well, I mean, the government, for instance, has a complete muddle, it seems to me, about age. I mean, on the one hand, we're all being told to work for longer, but there's no jobs.
Exactly.
And we're taking jobs from younger people. So this is just a mess.
They got terribly upset recently because they created an apprenticeship scheme and then found the apprenticeship scheme being filled by old people. And, you know, they didn't know how to handle that. So you get the rhetoric of the people who say, I mean, recently you had Cameron talking about we must all work to 70, but he hasn't kind of worked out how to make that possible. And, of course, ageism is still very prevalent. One of the great ironies is you would have thought in an era... I mean, I talked about us gaining 30 years. What I didn't mention was the fact that we're having fewer children. And so, I mean, we have a huge population problem anyway, you know, huge population. So having fewer children shouldn't really matter, but what it does mean is this ageing population profile. There are whole parts of the world where there will be, by 2050, there will be 2/5 of the population in their seventh decade and older. And if you think about what that means in terms of the services people need and who does the work and everything, there are huge implications there. They're not as bad as people think they are, because one of the other things is that we are able to work longer, or we should be able to work longer because we're living longer, though that involves having policies that enable you to live healthily for longer. But nobody really tackles ageism. And instead of becoming more open to the idea of people working for longer and being able to do more as they're older, we've become more enthralled to the idea of youth rather than less.
I was just about to say that, because you talk about, you know, being in an ageist culture, and certainly the constant row with the BBC about older women, which just goes on and on and on. And what is peculiar about it is it seems that everybody accepts it's wrong, and nobody does anything to put it right. And is that actually because, do you think deep down we don't want to see those older women on the screen, whereas we'll put up with chubby-looking Mark Mardell any old day, who, if he was a female, wouldn't... I don't mean to particularly zero in on him, but there's also a correspondent from Northern Ireland. There are a few people who you think if these were female, they just wouldn't be there.
It's much more... I mean, ageism is much, much more toxic around women, and that's because our value is bound up in the way we look. So there have been actually a number of articles in the magazines just in the last few days in the newspapers about this issue, prompted by Mark Thompson's hilarious apologia about the lack of older women on the BBC, which he's finally noticed. And these articles show, today there was one that showed older women who are anchors in other countries. And isn't this great? There's a 70-year-old woman here and there's a 60-year-old woman here. They're all beautiful. And nearly every single one of them has had cosmetic surgery. And sometimes, by the way, those two things don't go together. One of the things I did for the book, which was very scary, was I researched both the sort of treatments in holding back aging and also the cosmetic things. And I went and watched an operation, which was interesting. You can hear the nose bones break.
Did it put you off?
Sorry, not bones, cartilage. That's better, isn't it? I was actually almost sold. It's the other way around. I was almost sold because he showed me the before and after photos of lots of his patients, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was the first stage of cosmetic surgery. Everyone's in the wind tunnel. Second one, which we've seen a lot of recently, pillow face, where they realised that's about volume, so they puffed it out. And now they've got to one that's much more realistic, and they can do necks, which I never knew. It's fantastic. So he nearly had me. He kept telling me I was lowbrow, which I thought, how do you know? But then he actually told me that I needed a nose job.
Uh-oh.
And I just thought, I've had this nose all my life. Why is my, and then he lost me.
But the book and the situation is just full of contradictions. In other words, you can grow old provided you're young. and provided you look young. I mean, but society still really doesn't like you when you actually finally look old, are old.
Well, part of the problem is society not only doesn't like it, we're less capable of dealing with it than we were. There is a kind of age apartheid. There used to be, for all sorts of reasons about the way we lived, in the dispersal of family, all of those aspects. We used to spend a lot more time around a bigger variety of ages. And we also used to have a place in communities for older people. We no longer do. Death itself has also become a problem for us. It's medicalised, it's pushed behind screens. We don't like to acknowledge it. I'm talking about this as if I do. Actually, I wrote a whole book to get away from it. But it is a real problem. And so that's why that is part of the reason for the disconnect.
What's going to happen?
I went to Las Vegas as part of my research, and that was one of the weirder experiences of all. I went to an age management clinic where they offered to put me on a sort of form of super HRT that recreates the vibrancy of youth. And when I was staying in Las Vegas, I noticed that everyone I met had the same face, men and women. And then I realised that there were only a few cosmetic surgeons working in Las Vegas, and so everyone goes and gets one variant of the face. The reason I'm saying this isn't about cosmetic surgery per se, but it made me realise how tipping points work, how social pressures work. And the reason in Las Vegas everybody has the same face is because if you come there without that face, you start looking peculiar. And so my answer is I don't really know what I think is going to happen, because it depends what becomes the sort of dominant culture and where the tipping point is. And I would like to think one of the benefits of amortality, I would like to think that in not giving in to these ideas about what you should not do, what you should not risk, and in trying to, I would like to give an alternative view of how you can be at 50 or 60 or whatever age I make it to, without being in denial. I'm going to try, that's my personal ambition, but I am swimming like Natalie against her tide. I'm swimming against a tide that believes that older people shouldn't be visible at all, and that they should behave a certain way. And so it really depends what wins out in the end.
Do you think, last question, because we're probably up to time, your latest book subject, is she a good example?
Yes.
Could we all end up looking like her?
It's really funny.
The British face, would that be a good look?
Well, I don't think that we need to have quite the expression of, we are not amused that she manages. But
I think she's looking more amused these days than in all of her life. She seems much happier.
Well, and quite clearly she should, because she's. Incidentally, research shows that you do get happier. There's this sort of dip, which is, I think, always good to know around your 40s, and then you're, in theory, going to get happier.
Is that because you think you're on the long glide home?
I think
some sort or another.
I think it's because you think your life is over in your 40s, and then you realise it isn't.
That's good. I'll buy that one.
But the Queen, no, it's really funny. Somebody from Age UK invited me to come and speak to some conference they're giving. And I said I just mentioned, I'm doing this book about the Queen, and I said, you should be doing something for the Jubilee, and they said, that's amazing. We've just had that conversation, because the Queen is the most perfect example of active ageing. Mm-hmm. She is also the most perfect example of how privilege helps you to age well. But
yeah, well, that is a whole other chapter. I suspect we've probably gone on quite a long time. This is Catherine's book. Is it here? Great, it's terrific. It's really good.
I'll sign anything you want.
And it's got a very good lot of tips, but you could probably add an addendum on the Queen later, the new edition. Catherine Mayer, thank you very much.
Thank you.